that Hillary Clinton be selected as the nominee of the Democratic Party for President of the United States.
Certainly an emotional moment for a lot of people for a lot of different reasons when Bernie Sanders officially ended his candidacy after an often brutal 18-month primary against Hillary Clinton. Of course, one major issue in this election centers on foreign policy and national security and America's role and approach when it comes to the rest of the world. Just one of the topics that we covered in a discussion with Admiral John Hudson when we sat down as he was fresh off the convention floor.
Admiral, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Impressive speech here at the convention. I'm very curious, for a leader in the military, how important is it, the message that comes from the White House as far as how you do your job?
Oh, I couldn't possibly overstate that. You know, in the military, the good leaders are good followers too. They know how to follow, and the president, as the commander-in-chief, is the ultimate leader, and so that everybody, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, all the warfighting commanders are following that lead, and you know the lead may be subtle, it may be a direct order, but everybody's following that lead. So if you've got a good, strong leader in the White House, everything's going to flow. Everybody's going to know what their job is and what they need to do to be successful.
You're obviously here in support of Hillary Clinton. Supporters of Donald Trump say, look, the way he talks and the way he says things, the direct nature of it, puts the rest of the world on notice so you know where he stands. Why do you think his message and the way he delivers it is problematic?
I think because where he stands is where nobody can stand. And so that, you know, he says, he makes all these declaratory statements, but the reality of it is he can't follow through on them. And he ends up undermining everything that he says. And you know, validating Putin and asking the troops to commit war crimes is not something that the American military can deal with. So, you know, he talks, but he's just talking through his hat as far as I'm concerned.
Democrats here at the convention, there's been some criticism that they haven't talked enough about foreign policy, at least in juxtaposition with how much it was talked about at the RNC.
Well, I think two things. One is I think he doesn't know shinola about foreign policy, so he stays away from it. The other thing is that he's creating a reverse in the Republican Party. The Republican Party used to be a party of robust American presence around the world. He's essentially an isolationist. He wants us to pull out of Japan and Korea. He doesn't want us to be involved in NATO. He says he won't protect NATO allies. So that, you know, that is anathema to the American military, not to abrogate treaties. I mean, it's unheard of. So he can't be a leader.
I want to ask you, just big picture philosophy. Time was, it was a prerequisite to have military service if you wanted to be president of the United States. It's been a while, though. I mean,
it's been a while.
Yeah.
It's been a while, and I think in the wake of World War II, that was probably almost inevitable in a draft era and so forth. I think you can be president of the United States and be a commander-in-chief now in 2016 and going forward with other kinds of experience. So, you know, I'd love to see people have the experience as commander-in-chief. I'd like to see more in Congress have experience. You know, I'd like to see more people have experience as being in the military, generally. But I don't think it's having spent, 4 years in the Marine Corps and, leaving as a sergeant doesn't necessarily make you commander-in-chief ready.
For someone in the military, someone who's leading a unit, someone that's leading a branch of service, is the approach the right one that we're taking?
Well, it's like I said in my speech. We have to have a robust military and face the enemy where they are. The problem, of course, now is that we don't even know exactly who the enemy is. Some whacked out kid, shoots a bunch of people, and he's a terrorist in the sense that he's a whacked out kid and killed a bunch of people, but he's not ISIS. So we need to be able to define the military or excuse me, to define exactly who the enemy is, and then make sure that we maintain our humanity, that we remember who we are as a nation, and not vary from that. Because if we do, if we let the enemy make us more like them, that's a victory. I don't know how long this war is going to go on, but I know that it's getting confused with criminal activity and warlike activity, and we need to make sure there's a separation between those two. And we don't credit ISIS for every whacked out kid who shoots a bunch of people.
Last question, and I'll wrap it up here. A lot of debate on whether the military is big enough right now, if it's fit to handle the challenges that we face globally. What's your thought?
I think it probably is. When I came in, we were manning the military to fight a two-front war and two smaller wars at the same time, simultaneously. It was kind of World War II plus, and that was too much. With our weaponry now and our strategy, and we're not facing a peer competitor anymore. At least if Donald Trump doesn't have his way, that we absolve NATO. But I think that we're kind of where we probably should be. I'd like to see more people come in and through, because it's a great experience, as you know. But I don't think it has to get a whole lot bigger.
Well, sir, I appreciate your time today, and I appreciate your service. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.